Bioenergetics. So we have learned about the origin of life as well as the theories that support certain hypotheses. So now we are going to discuss the deeper process that perpetuate life. So it is important to understand how this process occur at both a cellular and organismic level, and we also need to learn how energy is converted into matter and other forms of energy. So we have here the first, the cell as the basic unit of life. So we all know that the cell is the basic or the smallest unit of life. So the cells may come together and they will form tissues. And when these tissues come together, they form organs. And these organs make up the human body as well as the bodies of plants and animals. All right. So cell is very important in our life. It is because it is the smallest unit of life. If there are no cell, there would be no tissues, and of course there would no organs, and these organs make up the human body. And to be able to study the cell, we need the microscope. So the study of cell is not possible without a microscope. And the first simple microscope is constructed by Anton van Leeuwenhoek. So the cell is the basic unit of life. So we have the organisms that may be either unicellular. If we say unicellular, they are composed of one cell alone. Or multicellular, or they are composed of two or more cells. And also, cells comprise both animals and plants, although they are differences with regards to each. All right. So we have here different scientists who make a study about cell. First is Robert Hooke. So Robert Hooke in 1665 coined the term cell that he used to designate the small honeycomb-like structure that he was able to view on a cork bottle. Okay, he was impressed with the little structure as they reminded him of his rooms in a monastery. Matthias Sladen proposed that all plants are made up of cells. Then, in 1839, Theodore Schwann proposed that all animals were also made up of cells. Since, according to Matthias, the plants are made of cells, and Theodore proposed that animals were made of cells also, they have come to the decision that they will study the wide variety of plants and animals together. So they propose the term cell theory in 1839. So the cell theory essentially stated that all organisms are made up of cells. The theory, cell theory, was rewritten by Rudolf Virchow in 1858. Okay, in the succeeding theory, Virchow wrote that aside from all living things being made up of cells, all cells arise from pre-existing cells. So, meaning those cells in the bodies of the organisms came from pre-existing cells. In 1861, Jules found that cells were not empty. So, as we have mentioned earlier, Hooke thought, or Robert Hooke thought that the cell is an empty. But Jules have the study, and he found out that the cells are not empty, but that they can contain material known as protoplasm. It was during the 1950s that scientists were able to classify cells according to eukaryotic cells and the prokaryotic cells. All right, so now let us move with the modern cell theory. So the biologists today have made additions to the cell theory, which was stated before, and these are the following. So number one, all organisms are made up of cells. Number two, new cells arise from pre-existing cells. Number three, the cell is the structural and functional unit of all living things. Number four, the cell contains genetic information that is passed from cell to cell during cell division, and all cells are basically the same in chemical composition and metabolic activities. So the scientists were able to classify cells into two: the eukaryotic cells and the prokaryotic cells. Wherein eukaryotic cell means that it has a nuclear membrane that surrounds the nucleus. And for prokaryotic cells, uh, their cells lacks a nucleus and other organelles. So we have here also the study in the structure of the cell. So both prokaryotic cell and eukaryotic cells possess a plasma membrane and a cytoplasm. Okay, so the plasma membrane is the outermost surface of the cell, and it separates the cell from its environment. So we have here the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is the aqueous content of the cells. So in which the cells organelles are suspended. So in our illustration, this is the cytoplasm of the two cells. So meaning the cytoplasm is the water content of the cell where the organelles are located. So the plasma membrane, as mentioned earlier, is composed of carbon dioxide, proteins, phospholipids, and cholesterols. So this is a semi-permeable membrane that is present in all cells. The plasma membrane contains the lipid bilayer, which is termed as such because it contains two layers of fat cells organized into two sheets. So it is typically about 5 nanometers thick, and that surrounds all cells, providing the membrane structure. So the lipid bilayer explains its function as a barrier. Lipids are fats, such as oils, that are insoluble in water. So there are two important regions of a lipid that are crucial for the lipid bilayer. So the first one is the hydrophobic layer. Hydrophobic region is the polar head region, and the hydrophilic region is the non-polar regions. If we say hydrophilic region, it is attracted to water conditions, while the hydrophobic region is repelled from this condition. All right, since lipid molecules contain both regions, they are termed as amphipathic molecules. So the most abundant types of lipids found in the plasma membrane are phospholipids, and it has two non-polar fatty acid chain groups and a tail. So the tail is composed of a string of carbons and hydrogens due to its double bond structure. Next, we have here the bilayer. It is where the lipids organize themselves to hide their hydrophobic region and to expose their hydrophilic region. So in this case, the organization as such is a spontaneous process which does not require energy. So the most important property of the lipid bilayer is that it is a highly impermeable structure. So this means that the molecules cannot freely pass across the lipid layer. So only water and gas can pass through it. Next is our cytoplasm. So as mentioned earlier, the cytoplasm is the water region of the cell, and it contains the living components, which are cell organelles, and the non-living components such as the ergastric substances and the cytoskeletal elements. Without the organelles, the cytoplasm is termed as cytosol. So it is a jelly-like semi-fluid matrix that is found between the nuclear membrane and the cell membrane. We have here the cytoskeleton. This one is another cell component that gives the cell its structure. So it also allows the cell to adapt. Cells can reorganize their cytoskeletal components in order to change their shape. So the cytoskeleton also has tracts where it allows organelles to move around the cell. So they can move around the cell by the help of the cytoskeleton. It can also move entire cells in multicellular organisms. So that is the function of the cytoskeleton. So the nucleus of the cell, this is one of the largest organelles found in the cell. So it also plays an important biological roles. So the importance of the nucleus lies in its function uh, as the storage space for the DNA. So DNA is where we can find the genes. So the cell nucleus is composed of the two layers which form an envelope around the cell and only allow selected molecules to enter and leave the cell. So the DNA po is found in the cells, is packaged in chromosomes. So the nucleus is directly comes into contact with the endoplasmic reticulum. So it is also the site. The nucleus is also the site for the DNA and RNA synthesis. So for the Golgi complex, this is also known as the packaging center of the cell. So these tubules also end in vesicles. So the Golgi complex package or packages the proteins, carbohydrates, and etc. in their vesicles. So they also produce enzymes called the lysosomes, which are suicide bug. of the cell and result in cell death. So these suicide bags, they secrete enzymes, hormones, and material from the cell wall. Okay, so for this one, the function of the endoplasmic reticulum is that it helps in intracellular transportation. So what do we mean by that? The endoplasmic reticulum is a network of tubular structures found in the cytoplasm as and is bound by a membrane. So it extends from the nuclear membrane to the cell membrane. And also, endoplasmic reticulum provides mechanical support for the cytoplasmic matrix. And it helps in the formation of the Golgi complex and nuclear membrane. Next, we have the plastids. These are found in plants and cells and euglenoids. They are classified based on the type of pigment that they contain. So those three are the chromoplast, the leucoplast, and the chloroplast. Chromoplast contains the carotenoids. The leucoplasts store food materials and are colorless. And for the chloroplast, they are green in color and function in photosynthesis. Next, we have the vacuoles. So vacuoles are single membrane bound sacs that are present in the cytoplasm. So these plants or plant cells have vacuoles or have large vacuoles, while animal cells have small vacuoles. So the cell sap has sugars, salts, pigments, and enzymes. And last, we have the ribosome. So for the ribosome, it produces proteins in the cell. So these are granular, non-membranous structures inside the cell. So the ribosomes are present in the cytoplasm, mitochondria, and the chloroplast. So for the eukaryotic cells or the eukaryotes, they have 80 ribosomes rather, in the cytoplasm and 70 ribosomes in the plastids and mitochondria. So let us now, yeah. So we are here in photosynthesis. Photosynthesis in the easy word, this is the food making process of the plants. So photosynthesis is the process by which plants that contain chlorophyll convert energy from the sun into photochemical energy. So this energy is stored in the form of carbohydrates. And carbohydrates provide food for man and other heterotrophic organisms. So if we say heterotrophic organisms, they are the consumers. Human being and animals belong to heterotrophs. So as you can see here, we have the word equation for the photosynthesis. The carbon dioxide plus water, light and chlorophyll, it may result to glucose plus the oxygen. In simple equation, we have here again the carbon dioxide and the water, the glucose and the oxygen. So we are going to explain how photosynthesis occurs in this illustration. So the molecules of pigments, especially the chlorophyll, act in a matter that is catalytic in this reaction. If we say catalyst, they are the materials that being used para mas mabilis yung maging reaction. So in this primary event in photosynthesis, we have here the light energy. So obviously, light energy comes from the sun and it is being trapped in the leaves of the plants. So the chlorophyll absorbs green wavelength from the sun, making the plants look green. We have here the carbon dioxide. So CO2 enters through the stomata. So the stomata is an opening in the leaves, epidermis, and cuticles. So carbon dioxide also came from animals and the human being. Those are the yun yung ating ine-exhale pag tayo ay humihinga, the carbon dioxide. Next, water. Water is absorbed through the roots and carried through the stem to the rest of the parts of the plant. So a plant's roots replace water loss during transpiration. So kahit po hindi natin diligan yung mga halaman na yan, they can get water, no, under the ground. And the roots help the plant to absorb water. Next, if water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight combine in the leaf to make sugar, so it will produce glucose, or in terms, carbohydrates, and oxygen will be released by the plants through the stomata. So the water loss from leaves is called transpiration. So, the oxygen being released by the plants, ito naman po yung ginagamit natin to breathe. Alright? So, that is the primary events in the photosynthesis. Okay. So, we have here different steps po in the photosynthesis. The first one is the light absorption. So, there are main groups of pigments involved in the light absorption. Those are the chlorophylls, phycobilins, and carotenoids. These pigments function as a means for the plants to absorb light through the visible spectrum. So the energy is then transferred to reaction centers where it is used for photochemical reaction. So we have here the second step for photosynthesis, which is the light emission. So for the light emission, after fluorescence, delayed light emission occurs. So the synthetic organisms emit light for short periods of time. The third step is the energy transfer and migration. So through a maze of several hundreds of molecules, energy migration occurs until the energy reaches the reaction center where it can be converted into chemical energy, meaning that energy will be stored. Ma-store na siya. So there are two processes in the energy transfer and migration. So that those are the heterogeneous when the energy is transferred and homogeneous. Homogeneous when energy is transferred through the same kinds of molecules. And the last step for the photosynthesis is the reaction and or reaction at reaction centers. So this process by which energy reaches reaction centers and is converted into chemical energy. So after electrons are transferred, the product of oxygen and carbohydrates are created. So these are the four steps in the photosynthesis. So always remember, in food making process of plants, we only need three: the sunlight, the water, and the carbon dioxide. And after these four different steps, the products of the photosynthesis are the oxygen and carbohydrates.